very warm welcome to BBC News, broadcasting to our viewers in North America and around the globe. My name is Mike Embley. Our top stories.
The Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
Britain's Prime Minister survives a vote of no confidence from her own party, but the challenges over Brexit remain.
Here is our renewed mission: delivering the Brexit that people voted for, bringing the country back together and building a country that truly works for everyone.
President Trump's former lawyer is jailed for paying off two women who said they had affairs with Mr. Trump and lied to Congress. How could Michael Cohen's sentence affect the White House? Hundreds of police are still hunting a militant Islamist who carried out a deadly attack in the French city of Strasbourg. Hello to you. The British Prime Minister has survived a confidence vote from her own Conservative Party. But her opponents say the margin of victory is not enough to remove the doubts about the Prime Minister's authority at such a critical point in the Brexit process. The result was that 370 Conservative MPs were eligible to vote in the election. 200 voted in favour of the Prime Minister, 117 against her, a majority of 83. Before the vote, the Prime Minister had hinted to Conservative MPs she does not intend to lead the party into the next general election. That's meant to be in 2022. She insisted her focus should be on delivering Brexit somehow. Our political editor Laura Kuenssberg has this report. There is flash photography coming up.
Decision time. Survival time. For a Prime Minister and a party twisted together in a years-old fight. Only the Conservatives would do it like this behind those walls.
Returning officers.
A challenge in the morning, the rebels seen off before it's time for bed.
The result of the ballot held this evening is that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
200 of her MPs wanted her to stay, 117 wanted her to go. A clear result, but a party in obvious conflict.
No further confidence vote can take place for at least 2
To speak applause, what do the Tories really have to celebrate beyond tonight? It was another lonely journey to the microphone. The Prime Minister had to promise she'd go in order to stay for now.
This has been a long and challenging day, but at the end of it, I'm pleased to have received the backing of my colleagues in tonight's ballot. Whilst I'm grateful for that support, a significant number of colleagues did cast a vote against me, and I've listened to what they said. Following this ballot, we now need to get on with the job of delivering Brexit for the British people and building a better future for this country. A Brexit that delivers on the vote that people gave, that brings back control of our money, our borders and our laws, that protects jobs, security and the union, that brings the country back together rather than entrenching division. That must start here in Westminster, with politicians on all sides coming together and acting in the national interest. So here is our renewed mission: delivering the Brexit that people voted for, bringing the country back together and building a country that truly works for everyone.
Resilient, but not inscrutable. This is not the end of this argument or a triumph over hearts and minds.
Of course I accept this result, but the Prime Minister must realise that under all constitutional norms she ought to go and see the Queen urgently and resign.
There are lessons for her, lessons for the party. This has hardly been an ideal day for the Conservative Party, but the party has voted very comfortably that it wants her to stay, wants her to take us through Brexit.
The Prime Minister might have won. The divisions and bitterness are right out there. Listen to how her Chancellor talked about some of his colleagues.
And I think what this vote today will do is flush out the extremists who are trying to advance a particular agenda.
But a win is not the same as a true victory. Survival, not the same as succeeding. Another Tory Prime Minister's leadership fractured, if not broken, by a decades-old dispute of the party's own. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, on Thursday, European leaders meet in Brussels for a special summit. Britain's Prime Minister is expected to attend, hoping to win extra assurances from the EU to convince her opponents at home. They have focused on the so-called backstop, the guarantee to prevent the return of a hard border in Ireland. The Democratic Unionist Party of Northern Ireland wants the backstop abandoned. So do many Conservative MPs, but the EU insists the current agreement cannot be renegotiated. Our Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar now on what might come next.
They've been demonstrating here for months, rain or shine, for or against Brexit. Obsessed? Maybe. But they're also right to feel Brexit's the biggest issue facing Britain in decades. Bigger than tonight's decision to keep on and not sack Mrs May. It's still her job to try somehow to break the Brexit deadlock. And tonight's vote was never going to make that easier. Theresa May is still facing a deeply divided House of Commons party and cabinet, still struggling to win over Brexiteers who fear that the Brexit plan could leave the UK trapped inside European Union rules indefinitely. Some of them sit in cabinet. 2 have walked out since this was filmed. More of them are potential leadership candidates. And today, one Brexiteer warned a no-deal Brexit was still possible. And Mrs May, or presumably another leader, had to get more concessions out of Brussels or else.
It's very difficult to support the deal if we don't get changes to the backstop. I don't think it will get through. I'm not even sure that the Cabinet will agree for it to be put to the House of Commons.
Among the Cabinet's former Remainers, some would support a softer Brexit, with closer EU links than Mrs May's, though they're not saying that. They are saying they'd fight against leaving without a deal, and the Commons wouldn't wear it. You've been clear in your view that a no-deal Brexit is not a runner.
I've been clear that the House of Commons will stop no deal. The fact that I think it'll stop no deal doesn't mean we shouldn't continue preparations just in case. Some people have pointed out it could nevertheless happen. But I think no deal would be such a bad outcome for the country that I believe the House of Commons will assert itself and stop it.
So far, though, there's no sign of European leaders agreeing at tomorrow's EU summit that Britain could leave EU rules in its own time on its own terms. In Berlin today, the German leader spoke plainly.
We have no
intention of changing the exit agreement, Angela Merkel said. Today, Mrs May warned any leader would be short of time. The Brexit timetable is tight after tomorrow's summit. In the new year, before January 21st, the delayed meaningful vote in the Commons is due. If the government's defeated, it must report back on its plans for the next steps within 21 days. But any deal must also be approved by the European Parliament before it takes effect. Then, at 11 p.m. on March the 29th, the UK is due to leave the EU. But the Prime Minister and her deal are still facing defeat by MPs. No one can yet rule out a Brexit tied closely to the EU or a fresh referendum. And however long Theresa May has left in office, the biggest question of all, what's Britain's future, still hangs in the air. John Pienaar, BBC News.
Well, the EU has announced some further assurances on the Irish border backstop. Our Brussels reporter Adam Fleming told us more just now.
There is a document floating around Brussels tonight, which is the draft Council conclusions, which is the document the EU leaders will sign up to tomorrow night after the Brexit bit of their summit, which will take place here in Brussels after dinner at Thursday tomorrow. Now, this draft is floating around and it's got a few very, very interesting things in it. And what those things are is that it amounts to these are the assurances the EU is planning to give Theresa May so that she can take it back to the House of Commons and try and persuade MPs that the withdrawal agreement isn't that bad after all. It's all about the Northern Irish backstop. Remember that backup plan, the insurance policy for avoiding a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, which would see the UK, the whole of the UK, staying in a sort of customs union with the EU, and lots of EU rules and regulations still applying to Northern Ireland. Now, one of the Brexiteers' big fears, and many other MPs in Parliament's big fears, is that that backstop is actually going to be forever and the UK will never be able to escape from it. It will be the end state. Now, all along, the EU has said, no, that's not the case, it's temporary. We don't like it very much either. We want to avoid it at all costs. It's only a backup plan, a fallback if it's needed. So they've been going to great lengths to try and show just how temporary they want it to be. So this document that's floating around tonight, to be signed up by EU leaders, contains a commitment from the EU that they will continue to negotiate a future trade agreement with the UK, even if the backstop comes into place at the end of the post-Brexit transition period. So even if the backstop is in place, the UK and the EU will continue to negotiate a future trade deal that could get rid of it, swipe it away so you don't need it anymore. That is to prove that the EU is serious when it means the backstop is going to be temporary and it's not going to be forever. Then there's another little bit in the document, the second last paragraph. It's not very long, it's only 6 paragraphs. The second last paragraph says that this is going to be, or hints at that this is going to be a 2-stage process of providing reassurance. It will start tomorrow at the European Summit of Leaders. It will continue at an official and legal level, with a final product being published in January. So the British parliamentarians could potentially get a bit of reassurance tomorrow, with a lot more reassurance coming in January, which is when we think they then will vote on the final deal, finally.
Adam Fleming for us in Brussels. Now, before the confidence vote, the pound had rallied. It retreated once the result became clear. It had been a good day, though, for the London stock market and Wall Street. Both posted gains. And markets have opened across Asia. Marika Ooi is on the trading floor of IG in Singapore.
That's right, Mike. We found out the result at 5 a.m. local time, and some of the Asian markets started trading at 8 a.m. In terms of the stock market, we're not seeing too much reaction. Markets like Japan, South Korea and Australia opened flat to higher. But as you mentioned, in terms of the currency market, it has been a very volatile day for the British pound. It fell when the no confidence vote was announced, but then it started to rise when there were reports that Mrs. May was likely to win the vote. But when she did actually survive the leadership challenge, it started to fall, because what it showed was over a third of her own MPs voted against her, which means for her to push through her Brexit deal will be very challenging. Of course, she says that she will renegotiate the deal when she's in Brussels later today. But joining me now is Jing-Ying Pang. She's a market strategist at IG. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know that you were up, awake, watching that result. What was your first reaction when you found out that Mrs. May survived the leadership vote?
Thanks for having me. So just looking at the reaction, I think it didn't come out too much of a surprise for market, as you mentioned. Evidently, we've seen the cable itself rise slightly more than 1% to its peak at one point of time with the market expecting the result. A bit of a sell, the news came through once again for the pound, give or take about 40 to 50 pips. But really, I think the market is just expecting this. Doesn't change things too much as we move forward. Once again, we have to look at how the vote from the parliamentary itself is going to eventually turn out.
Of course, we're not seeing too much reaction in Asian stock markets, but this means even a lot more uncertainties going forward. What do you think this means for the market sentiment?
Well, if you look at what are the options on the table, it isn't really too much changes. It only removes this no confidence vote from the list over there. To some extent, Prime Minister Theresa May, she may still face a little more challenges from other parties. Not to mention as well, we know that she's headed back to Brussels to renegotiate this. The market's expecting just perhaps maybe some concessionary changes, but that's not going to change the picture. So ultimately, I think we're still going to see how the results turn out. To some extent, I would say the market is not expecting the worst case scenario right now, but should that actually come through, I think that's one to be worried about.
Jing-Ying Pang, thank you so much for joining us today. So a bit of a sigh of relief, I guess, but of course uncertainties continue for markets. Mike.
Mariko, thank you very much for that. Thanks to you for being with us. Stay with us if you can. Much more to come, including this. Donald Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, is jailed for 3 years and blames his crimes on his former boss.
John Lennon was shot at the entrance to the Dakota building in the center of New York. There's been a crowd here standing in more or less silent vigil, and the flowers have been piling up.
The 14th ceasefire of this war ended at the walls of the old city of Dubrovnik. This morning, witnesses said shells were landing every 20 seconds.
People are celebrating the passing of a man they hold responsible for hundreds of deaths and oppression. Elsewhere, people have been gathering to mourn his passing.
Imelda Marcos, the widow of the former president of the Philippines, has gone on trial in Manila. She's facing 7 charges of tax evasion. She pleaded not guilty.
The Prince and Princess of Wales are to separate. A statement from Buckingham Palace said the decision had been reached amicably.
Latest headlines for you from BBC News. Theresa May has survived a vote of no confidence in her leadership. The British Prime Minister says she is determined to see through the Brexit process. Donald Trump's former personal lawyer has been jailed for 3 years for lying to Congress and breaching election campaign rules. And as he was sentenced, he made a blistering attack on the president. Michael Cohen admitted organising payments to 2 women who claimed to have slept with Mr. Trump. He admitted giving false information about contacts between the Trump campaign and Russia. And he told the court his job had been to cover up his boss's dirty deeds. President Trump has denied any wrongdoing. Nick Bryant reports.
Michael Cohen used to boast he was Donald Trump's pit bull, but he arrived at this courthouse in Manhattan, his family at his side, ready to sink his teeth into the president. Speaking before he was sentenced, he delivered an excoriating address, one that immediately entered the history books of the Trump era, one that made it sound as if his former boss was the true guilty party. At times fighting back tears, Michael Cohen said he'd been in a state of mental and personal incarceration since first working for Donald Trump. He said the president was right to call him weak because he'd covered up what he called his dirty deeds out of a sense of blind loyalty. He said there was little to admire about Donald Trump. He apologized to the American people, and he said he'd give as much information to the special counsel Robert Mueller as he could truthfully give. Courtroom artists caught the anguish on his face as he admitted that his own weakness had led him to choose what he described as a path of darkness over light, and that the judge sentenced him to 3 years in prison. Cohen told the court, "Today is the day I am getting my freedom back."
The words the media should be using to describe Mr. Trump are generous, compassionate, principled.
These were the days before he unshackled himself from Donald Trump, when he revelled in his role as his personal fixer, the man who supposedly made problems go away. And that's what he hoped to do by making hush money payments to 2 women, including the porn star Stormy Daniels, who claimed to have had sexual liaisons with Mr. Trump. Those payments violated campaign finance laws, and federal prosecutors said last week they were directed by Donald Trump in order to avoid a potential sex scandal ahead of the 2016 presidential election. Cohen was also sentenced for lying to Congress about his discussions with Kremlin officials about a proposed Trump Tower in the heart of Moscow. Recently, Donald Trump described his former right-hand man as weak and not very smart. But tonight he was unusually reticent when asked by reporters for his reaction to Cohen's speech.
Mr. President, did Michael Cohen cover up your dirty deeds? What dirty deeds are you talking about, Mr. President?
And with that, the door was shut on reporters. But those nettlesome questions just won't go away. Nick Bryant, BBC News, New York.
Another Canadian citizen appears to have gone missing in China, the second this week. Officials suspect Beijing is retaliating for the arrest of the Chinese tech executive, Meng Wanzhou, detained in Vancouver this month. Canada's foreign minister says officials have been unable to contact a man who'd said he was being asked questions by Chinese authorities.
We are aware of a Canadian who got in touch with us because he was being asked questions by Chinese authorities. We have not been able to make contact with him since he let us know about this. We are working very hard to ascertain his whereabouts. And we have also raised this case with the Chinese authorities. We are in touch with his family.
Hundreds of police are still hunting the gunman who escaped last night after killing 3 people and wounding 13 at a Christmas market in the French city of Strasbourg. It's thought he may have crossed the border into Germany. Security forces there are on alert. Investigators say it was an act of terror. Damien Grammaticus reports now from Strasbourg.
This is a city on alert. Hundreds of police and soldiers on a manhunt for a killer. But where did he go? Even the nearby border watched to stop him slipping away. Sharif Chekat, the suspected gunman, police now appealing for help finding him. He'd opened fire near the Christmas markets. This is the old heart of Strasbourg. People barricaded themselves inside. Among his victims, a tourist from Thailand, here on holiday with his wife. Sharif Chekat, 29 years old, has been in prison, has 27 convictions for crimes like robbery, and was already on France's terror watch list.
40 minutes, 40 minutes ça a duré.
The shooting went on for 30 or 40 minutes, Robin says. He filmed police scrambling for cover and says he knew the gunman.
Ouais, il était enfermé ici.
Yes, he was in prison here and in Germany too, he says. Outside the shop where he took cover, Ali told us he saw Chekat go past shooting and recognised him as they'd been in prison together.
Ça courait, les policiers et tout.
I saw people running, he says. Police running too. Everyone was saying it's gunshots. So now Strasbourg's famous Christmas market has been shuttered. All business stopped.
The Christmas market is one of the big attractions that draws visitors to Strasbourg. We don't know when this one will reopen. France has been put on the highest level of alert. The government says that security will now be stepped up at Christmas markets across the country. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Strasbourg.
Let's quickly round up some more of the main news to keep you up to date. 7 mass graves have been discovered in a former stronghold of the extremist group that calls itself Islamic State, according to Syrian state media. They contain hundreds of unidentified bodies showing signs of torture. A Syrian Red Crescent official told reporters there are several women among the dead and says some of those killed were blindfolded and handcuffed. 2 cardinals facing allegations linked to sexual abuse have been removed from Pope Francis's inner circle, according to the Vatican. Australia's George Pell and Chile's Francesco Javier Razoriz will no longer sit on the Council of Cardinals, set up by the Pope as an international advice body. Both deny the allegations against them. There was an unusual interruption in Colombia's Senate when protesters threw a bag containing rats and mice onto the floor of the chamber. In total, 4 rodents were involved. Only this one escaped. The demonstrators, it's thought, were making a point about corruption. Let's take you back to that top story. Theresa May surviving that confidence motion from her own party. She had urged Conservative MPs to think of the voters. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth been to Market Harborough in Leicestershire, where 51% of people voted leave. She asked voters for their reaction to what's been going on.
6 and 3, 63.
It wasn't just the bingo numbers being watched at Market Harborough's Conservative Club tonight. All eyes were on the figures dictating Theresa May's fate too.
I'm really pleased for her because I think she really deserves to be given a chance. I think she's had some real hard press.
I'm disappointed. I think that she's got us into an awful mess.
When members gathered for their Christmas dinner before the vote, talk was of how the Tory party has handled Brexit so far. Jim's a long-term Conservative supporter. He voted Remain but accepts the referendum result, just not what's happened since.
For the last 2.5 years, they've done nothing but backbite and argue with one another.
Brexit-backing Mick said the Prime Minister has been part of the problem.
I thought she'd be a Maggie, a bit stronger, but she ain't.
Do you still think Brexit's going to happen?
I don't know.
But for Sylvia, who supported the Tories for almost 60 years, it's time the party rallied round the leadership.
It's going to be tough. And all we can do is accept what she can achieve for us and make the best of a bad job.
In Market Harborough, the referendum result almost mirrored the national picture. It backed Leave, but only just. Earlier today, people here said it was time those in Westminster improved their approach to Brexit, although there's still division about the way ahead.
Just get it done and get out.
Pauline's been a barber here for 8 years.
At the end of the day, people want out. Whether we like it, you know, you like it, that's the opinion of the country.
What do you think about the idea of another vote?
No. No.
But her colleague, Ollie, says what the Prime Minister negotiated should be put to the public, not just politicians.
I think you should take her deal to the public and say, second referendum, Remain, go back to the pre-2016, or have Theresa May's deal and let the public decide from there. I don't think it should be left to those guys down in Westminster, because I think they've proven over the last 18 months that they don't get stuff done.
However you cut it, tonight's result won't quieten all the critics or shut down this debate. Instead, there are more questions about where it's all headed next. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Market Harborough.
More to come on that, very likely. Much more on all the news for you anytime on the BBC website. You can reach me and most of the team on Twitter. I'm at BBC Mike Hembley. Thank you for watching.
Hello. There'll be a definite chill in the air over the next couple of days. Not only will the air be cold, we have a strong winds to contend with, which will exacerbate that chilly feel during the day ahead. It should be dry for most, but not quite for all. A frontal system lingering in western areas, bringing some outbreaks of rain here. That front making very little progress, though, because it's running up against this big block of high pressure, and the squeeze between the two will be driving a brisk southeasterly winds across the country. It will not feel warm by any stretch of the imagination. Now, we're starting off Thursday on a largely dry note, a fair amount of cloud around and a few showers peppering North Sea coast, and our weather front bringing cloud and some patchy rain for Northern Ireland, the far southwest of Wales, the far southwest of England. Elsewhere, we will develop some long spells of sunshine. However, we will have this winds to contend with, particularly gusty for some western coastal areas. So put a thermometer outside, it might say 5, 6 or 7 degrees, but when we factor in the wind chill, it will feel more like -1 for the Channel Islands, freezing for Birmingham, 1 degree in Glasgow. A very chilly feeling day, leading into a pretty chilly night Thursday night into Friday. There'll be more in the way of clear starry skies overhead, the winds easing a little, so that will allow temperatures to drop, particularly across Scotland, England and Wales. You can see this blue shading on our temperature chart. Towns and cities will get down to freezing or a touch below. It could be colder than that in the countryside. Not quite as cold across the far west, particularly Northern Ireland, because here there'll be more cloud. There'll be some patchy rain. This old weather front still lingering here as we go on through Friday. But elsewhere, a decent amount of sunshine, still the potential for 1 or 2 showers blowing into North Sea coasts. Now, these numbers don't look particularly impressive, 3, 4, 5 degrees, but by Friday, the winds won't be quite as strong, so it may feel just a little less bitter. And then, as we head towards the weekend, a change, because these frontal systems here will have a bit more impetus about them. They will make more progress. They'll bring some wet weather across the country, but that rain running into cold air. So just about wherever you are, there could be, for a time, a little bit of snow. But over high ground of Northern Ireland, Northern England and most especially Scotland, there is the potential for some fairly widespread and possibly disruptive snow. We'll have to keep you posted on that one. However, milder air will be wafting in from the southwest all the time, so wintry weather will slowly but surely turn back to wet weather, and all of us will eventually get into that milder air as we head through Sunday and Monday, but there'll still be some wind and rain at times.
Join Simon McCoy as he brings you the top stories live.
The ball is entirely in the UK's court. We could have got our tennis correspondent to report on this.
The latest in sport.
Heaven knows how they're dealing with this on the court.
The heat or the wind? I'm not quite sure.
Well, both.
The day's weather.
It's getting colder.
And undeniable chemistry.
He's still laughing.
We have to talk to each other.
There's only one Simon.
So you're the real McCoy.
Afternoon Live with Simon McCoy, weekdays at 2 p.m. on the BBC News Channel.
Sometimes being in the driving seat is... She stayed in school. She's a... This isn't just playing sports. This is... The simple act of standing, and you're a... You don't need superpowers to change the world. 100 Women. A season of inspiring and challenging stories on the BBC.
Latest headlines for you from BBC News. The British Prime Minister has survived a confidence vote from her own Conservative Party, but a third of her own members of Parliament voted against her. And with Brexit at a crucial stage, the result is not much help to her chances of getting her deal approved by MPs. She is heading to see European leaders, hoping for reassurances that may help convince her opponents at home. Donald Trump's former lawyer has been sentenced to 3 years in jail for paying off 2 women who said they'd had affairs with Mr. Trump. Michael Cohen also admitted lying to Congress about a proposed Trump Tower project in Russia. French police and security forces are still hunting the suspect in the deadly Strasbourg Christmas market attack. There are reports the gunman may have crossed the nearby border into Germany. Security forces there are also on alert. It's just gone 2:30 in the morning. You're up to date on the headlines. It's time now for Wednesday in Parliament.
Hello again and welcome to Wednesday in Parliament. And what a day it turned out to be.
The Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
Yeah! Theresa May survives a vote of confidence in her leadership after a last-ditch appeal to wavering Tory MPs at Prime Minister's questions.
The biggest threat to people and to this country isn't leaving the EU, it's a Corbyn government.
The Labour leader calls for a different sort of vote on her Brexit deal.
Her behaviour today is just contemptuous of this Parliament and of this process.
And in the Lords, an Archbishop demands post-Brexit reconciliation.
When 2 elephants fight, the grass gets hurt.
All that to come and more, but first the outcome from another turbulent, momentous day here at Westminster. Today's vote was triggered after 48 Conservative MPs wrote letters to say they had no confidence in Theresa May. The result was announced at 9 o'clock this evening.
The Parliamentary Party does have confidence. The number of votes cast in favour of having confidence in Theresa May was 200 and against was 117.
That means Theresa May can't be challenged for the party leadership for another year, although most Conservatives expect she'll step down before then. And behind closed doors this evening, she told her MPs she won't lead them into the next election. Before tonight's vote, the Prime Minister had to face, as usual at noon on Wednesdays, questions from MPs. And as ever, the first question was about the Prime Minister's engagements.
Mr. Speaker, today I will have meetings, possibly many meetings, with ministerial colleagues and others.
Terry McCarthy!
So just a normal day in the office then, Prime Minister?
But it's been far from a normal week.
Last year, the Prime Minister told us that there wasn't going to be a general election, and then there was. This week, she told us she wasn't going to pull the meaningful vote, and then she did. Can I ask her now if she's going to rule out having a general election and a people's vote?
Yes, can I say to the Honourable Lady, first of all, that I think that a general election at this point in time would not be in the national interest in the middle of our negotiations. And secondly, as she will have heard me say before in this House, I think we should respect the result of the referendum that took place in 2016.
The Labour leader mocked the Prime Minister's trip to European capitals on Tuesday after her decision to cancel Monday's vote on her deal.
Since the Prime Minister has not achieved any changes, either to the withdrawal agreement or the future partnership, can she now confirm that we will have the concluding days of debate and votes within the next 7 days before the House rises for the Christmas recess?
Theresa May tried to win over her own MPs by turning defence into attack on Labour.
Well, let me say Yes, when I'll tell members on the other side, when we've had a meaningful vote, we had it in the referendum on 2016. And if he wants a meaningful date, I'll give him one. 29th of March 2019, when we leave the European Union.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Totally and absolutely unacceptable to this House in any way. This House agreed a programme motion. This House agreed the 5 days of debate. This House agreed when the vote was going to take place. The government tried to unilaterally pull that and deny this House the chance of a vote on this crucial matter. The Prime Minister and her government have already been found to be in contempt of Parliament. Her behaviour today is just contemptuous of this Parliament and of this process. Mr. Speaker, the time for dithering and delay by this government is over. The Prime Minister has negotiated her deal. She's told us it's the best and only deal available. There can be no more excuses, no more running away. Put it before Parliament and let's have the vote. Whatever happens with her Conservative leadership vote today, it is utterly irrelevant to the lives of people across our country.
He should be honest with people. He should be honest with people about his position. He couldn't care less about Brexit. What he wants to do is bring down the government, create uncertainty, sow division and crash our economy. The biggest threat to people and to this country isn't leaving the EU. It's a Corbyn government.
This government is a farce. The Tory party is in chaos. The Prime Minister is a disgrace with their actions. The reality is that people across Scotland and the UK are seeing this today. Prime Minister, take responsibility, do the right thing, resign.
Can I just say to the right honourable gentleman, he claims that he makes the remarks he does about the deferring the vote. But of course it is precisely because I have listened, and colleagues in government have listened to the views of people across this House, that we are pursuing this issue further with the European Union. That is being respectful of the views that have been raised in this House.
Was, even by its standards, an unusually noisy question time. Many of Theresa May's critics sat in silence on the benches behind her. But the father of the House, the longest-serving MP, offered his support.
At a time of grave national crisis on an issue which we all agree has huge importance to future generations, can my right honourable friend think of anything more unhelpful, irrelevant and irresponsible than for the Conservative Party to embark on weeks of a Conservative leadership election?
My right honourable and learned friend has raised an important issue, and I think it is the impact that those weeks of that campaign would have on the decision that the House has to take and the decision that we have to take as a country in relation to leaving the European Union, because there is no doubt that would go beyond the legislated date of the 21st of January, and it would mean that were a new leader to come in, that one of the first things they would have to do would be to either extend Article 50 or rescind Article 50, and that would mean either delaying or stopping Brexit.
Does the Prime Minister judge that it is more welcome or more appropriate to face a no-confidence motion from her backbenchers or from the Leader of the Opposition?
I say to the right honourable gentleman, but that is not. Obviously, we have one of those which is going to take place. What I think is important for everybody in this House is to recognise that we have, I believe, a solemn duty to deliver on the result of the referendum in 2016. I believe the best way of doing that is with a good deal, with a good Brexit deal with the European Union that protects jobs and honours the referendum, and I believe that's the deal we've negotiated.
The Lib Dem leader with a reminder for MPs, especially perhaps Labour ones, that there's more than one way to get rid of a Prime Minister. Now, one of the reasons why Theresa May's Brexit deal is so unpopular with MPs is the so-called backstop, an insurance policy to avoid checks on the Irish border that would see the UK following some EU rules if there's no trade deal after Brexit. You won't be surprised to learn that the issue surfaced during Northern Ireland questions.
Last week the Secretary of State was telling everybody that this was the best deal, the only deal. The Prime Minister now says that that isn't the case, she needs changes. So what does she say to that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've said already, this is the best deal. This is the best way for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union as a whole in an orderly way. But the Prime Minister has recognised the concerns. She has listened to the concerns that the Right Honourable Gentleman and his colleagues and many others in this House have around the backstop, and she is looking to assuage those concerns.
Dodds! Right, well, the Secretary of State can't have it both ways. She's telling everybody that's the best deal, it's a wonderful deal, and everybody should accept it. On the other hand, the Prime Minister is telling everybody that nobody likes it, the Irish don't want it, Europe don't want it, the British government don't want it. So how does she explain the utter contradiction in her argument?
Mr. Speaker, I disagree with the Right Honourable Gentleman that there's a contradiction, because I think what he's talking about is the backstop, and we all agree that the backstop is a very uncomfortable thing that none of us want to see introduced, as we never want to see any insurance policy being called upon, because the fact you're calling upon an insurance policy means that the worst has happened.
In recent weeks, the Secretary of State has publicly stated that the backstop protocol, the current one, puts Northern Ireland in an unrivalled position in the world as a destination for foreign direct investment. However, a Cabinet colleague, the Scottish Secretary, said any suggestion of an advantage for Northern Ireland is a wholly false argument. Can I ask the Secretary of State, who's right, the Scottish Secretary or herself?
Mr. Speaker, I trust that the Honourable Gentleman is not trying to somehow use the unique situation in Northern Ireland and the success of Northern Ireland to try to somehow impute that there needs to be a special status for Scotland. The fact is that Northern Ireland has a land border with Ireland and therefore will be in an unrivalled position, because it will be the only place that has both a land border with the European Union and access to trade deals through the independent trade policy of the United Kingdom.
Labour said the Belfast Good Friday Agreement meant Northern Ireland's politicians should be consulted about changes in EU rules.
Why should Northern Ireland members have confidence in this government? Why should the people of Northern Ireland believe this government is committed to devolution, to the peace process and to the Good Friday Agreement?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is this government that has inserted in the withdrawal agreement and the future political the political declaration of the future relationship our absolute commitment to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement.
Karen Bradley. And staying with Northern Ireland, a minister has warned that the pressure on Westminster to act over the province's abortion laws will increase unless devolution is restored. Abortion is prohibited in most circumstances and is devolved to Stormont, which has been suspended since January last year. Penny Mordaunt was giving evidence to MPs on the Women and Equalities Committee.
Governments of successive colours have decided to delegate this as a policy area to Northern Ireland, yet you've signed international agreements on a Westminster level. How are you going to sort that out, particularly when you don't have an assembly in Northern Ireland and in light of the Supreme Court judgment?
So this is where I think the GEO should be making a difference, because obviously it is government policy that these are devolved matters, but anyone can see from Supreme Court rulings and cases that are still being under consideration, but also the view that this House has expressed on these matters, that that is not going to be a tenable situation if the situation in Northern Ireland with the lack of an assembly continues. I mean, that's just, I think, a incontrovertible and irrefutable reality. So I think what you would want from your Equalities Office in such circumstances is to be thinking through the possibilities that will inevitably come from that. If there is in my view, if there is the absence of the Assembly continues, I think the pressure for Westminster to act will increase.
Penny Morton. You're watching Wednesday in Parliament with me, David Cornock. Don't forget, if you miss our nightly roundup or you just want to watch it again, I know some of you do, you can find it on the BBC iPlayer. Interserve, one of the UK's largest providers of public services, revealed earlier this week that it was seeking a rescue deal. The firm, which works in prisons, schools, hospitals and on the roads, has £500 million of debts, but has said it is making good progress on a recovery plan. The news follows the collapse of Carillion in January this year, which put thousands of jobs at risk and cost taxpayers tens of millions of pounds. In the Lords, peers demanded assurances about public services and jobs.
You may be talking to Interserve, but are you talking to the companies that support Interserve where they deliver their services to people? Because if you did, you'd hear from Rudy Klein, the Chief Executive of the Specialist Engineering Contractors Group, SECA, who is advising their members not to work for Interserve. Now, your response seems very relaxed in the light of what's actually going on out there. So could you tell us what contingencies are you taking in the event that Interserve is unable to deliver services?
Well, on the first point, I made inquiries about the suppliers to Interserve. 90% of suppliers are paid in 60 days or less. So far as contingency plans are concerned, the government has now insisted that where it places new contracts with suppliers, there is a contingency plan to take effect if and when that contract runs into difficulties. And Interserve, along with 4 other companies, are piloting this new arrangement which we've introduced post the problems with Carillion.
Lord Young. The Foreign Office Minister Alan Duncan has robustly rejected accusations that an organisation has been using public money to distribute material on Twitter criticising the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. The Institute for Statecraft is running a project called the Integrity Initiative, which is working to counter Russian disinformation activity. Sir Alan told MPs that the Institute had itself been the victim of hacking by Russia.
The government is funding this initiative with nearly £2 million this financial year. That funding covers its activity outside the UK, and it does not fund any activity within the UK. Nor does it fund the management of the Integrity Initiative's social media account. Recent reports that Foreign Office funding has been used to support party political activity in the UK are therefore wholly untrue.
It is a cardinal rule of public life in our country that official resources should not be used for political purposes, a rule we saw symbolised this very morning when the Prime Minister delivered her statement outside Downing Street with the usual government coat of arms removed from her lectern because of the political nature of her statement. And there is, I'm afraid, absolutely no doubt that the publicly funded Integrity Initiative has broken that rule on a repeated basis by using its Twitter accounts to disseminate articles attacking the integrity of Conservative and Labour officials, of Conservative peers, and, on a repeated basis, the leader of Her Majesty's opposition.
She said the Integrity Initiative's Twitter use was central to its applications for funding from the Foreign Office.
The budget for their agreed objective to increase reporting in the media and expand the impact of their website and Twitter account amounted to £270,000 in the current financial year. And in the list of key deliverables they promised the Foreign Office this year, they stated explicitly that one of their instruments of delivery will be, and I quote, their 600+ Twitter followers, including influential players. If the government intends to renew that funding for the next financial year, what arrangements and agreements will be put in place to ensure that nothing of this sort ever happens again?
Mr. Speaker, it's a matter of regret that the Right Honourable Lady did not listen to the answer that I gave a moment ago. Let me explain to the House what has been going on. The Institute for Statecraft was hacked several weeks ago, and numerous documents were published and amplified by Kremlin news channels. The Russian state media campaign which followed it fits with a wider pattern of Russian disinformation against the UK. This campaign's objective is clear. It is yet another example of Russian disinformation intended to confuse audiences and discredit an organisation which is working independently to tackle the threat of disinformation.
Faced with heckling from Labour MPs, Sir Alan made his point more forcefully.
No Foreign Office funding is used for their UK domestic activity, and she can look at me as aghast as she likes, but the money that comes from the Foreign Office is used for activity overseas, and she should accept that as the and if she doesn't accept it, she should say in terms what she is accusing me of, because that would be a breach of the forms of the House.
Our most powerful tool against any Russian misinformation is that we have respect for the rule of law, the democratic process, and critically, transparency. We owe it to them who are working in these organisations, and I know that the Minister will be well aware of many of those who work in very difficult circumstances, who themselves find themselves at the hard edge of Russian disinformation campaigns.
I welcome the absolute clarity of the Minister's statement and his refuting of these allegations. And I also welcome the work of the Institute for Statecraft. Does the Minister agree with me, though, that we need to double down on this work? Because the reality is that the DCMS Select Committee has shown the danger to our democracy, our very way of life, through Russian disinformation.
Back to the Lords now, where the government came under pressure to call another referendum before Britain leaves the European Union, a so-called people's vote. But the idea of another vote was firmly resisted by a Brexit minister.
My Lords, the government has been clear that we will not hold a second referendum. A clear majority of the electorate voted to leave the European Union in the people's vote held in 2016. We must respect both the will of the British people and the democratic process which delivered this result.
My Lords, of course, bearing in mind that a people's vote would have no direct connection to the previous referendum, it's a separate matter entirely, would not the Minister now undertake to make sure that the government, led by either the present incumbent or whoever who succeeds her over the next short period, should really concentrate now on examining the incredible number of messages that are coming into all government departments, but his as well, saying from people who were Leave voters before that they're minded now to consider changing their minds, bearing in mind changed circumstances.
Well, no is the short answer to his question, and I don't know where he gets his figures from about the incredible number of messages, because I certainly haven't seen any.
My Lords, I think 48 messages that went to Mrs May, which was able to lead straight away to an election. So other votes are now awaited. We need votes in the other House on the withdrawal deal. We need to vote on this government for its mishandling of Brexit, for the NHS waiting lists, for the universal credit shambles, and for much else besides. So could the noble Lord the Minister perhaps undertake to this House to advise Mrs May that the correct way forward for a Prime Minister who's lost control of her Cabinet, of the Commons, and indeed, I think, of the country, is to call general election?
I'm sure the Prime Minister will be very grateful for the advice from the noble lady, and if I get the opportunity, I will, of course, pass on her fond regard.
Will my noble friend look at the situation in the Netherlands, where the government there is considering banning referendums altogether?
I understand the point that my noble friend is making, and I realise that this is a view that is widely shared, but I would just point out that, of course, the referendum was agreed to, authorised and voted for by this Parliament. We agreed to ask the people what their verdict was on the European Union.
My Lords, the Prime Minister was very clear that there wouldn't be a general election in 2017. The Prime Minister and members of her Cabinet who were dispatched last Friday, and then even on Monday morning, were very clear there was actually going to be a vote on the withdrawal agreement on Tuesday evening in the House of Commons. There wasn't. So how certain is the Minister that in fact the Prime Minister won't change her mind and allow a people's vote, assuming that she survives this evening?
Well, I'm very certain is the answer to her question, and as she well knows, to hold a referendum, as for the previous referendum, the government would need to introduce legislation to do so, and we are not going to.
My Lords, would the noble lord agree with me with this African sentiment that when two elephants fight, the grass gets hurt? Is it time now that we need to look for more reconciliation as a nation, to move forward, not having more point scoring, but actually listening to one another in a sense of humility, of humbleness, kindness, and have more civil discourse than point scoring? Otherwise, elephants are fighting and the grass is getting hurt.
I think as on so many things, the Right Reverend Prelate makes important points that we should all take careful heed of.
Would my noble friend accept that the referendum in June 2016 divided this country more bitterly than anything in living memory? What is the point of exacerbating that division by having another referendum for which there is clearly no groundswell of public opinion? And as somebody who deeply regrets the result of the referendum of 2016, I would endorse, and hope my noble friend will, the Archbishop's plea for reconciliation.
I think my noble friend is absolutely correct. I think there are many arguments against a second referendum, but I think the most powerful one is that it wouldn't necessarily solve anything.
The Brexit Minister, Lord Callanan. As we saw there, Theresa May's political difficulties were seldom far from peers' minds. The Labour peer, Lord Fowkes, even managed to raise her future in a question about housing.
What advice would he give to someone threatened with eviction from their home just off Whitehall?
Stick at it and she'll be there tomorrow.